Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, February 26th, 2018, and time for another week. Another week of Trump craziness, I am sure. Let's see, the Olympics are over, so that distraction is gone. And this morning, I don't know, as everybody's reacting to this Ivanka Trump interview. Did it air this morning? Is that what happened? Because I understand it was taped before the closing ceremonies at which Ivanka was in attendance. That would mean it happened, I guess it's happening like 24 hours ago at this point. But of course wasn't, I guess if it wasn't aired until this morning here in the United States, well then how can you blame everybody for reacting to it? And did it air on the Today Show? Because that's who's tweeting it around. Interesting, the question, I guess, put to Ivanka by Peter Alexander. Do you believe your father's accusers? Those, of course, being his sexual misconduct accusers. Thank you, Today Show, for filling in the blanks on that one. Ivanka, of course, responds, I think it's a pretty inappropriate question to ask a daughter if she believes the accusers of her father when he's affirmatively stated that there's no truth to it. Of course, well, he has actually stated it. It really shouldn't have been in the affirmative, that he did say that there was no truth to it. And of course, huge problem. I guess the interview continued after that point, which is amazing because, of course, it is a perfectly appropriate question to ask a White House staffer, a senior White House staffer at that, but it is, of course, inappropriate to make your daughter your top White House staffer. That is an inappropriate position to put her in. And of course, everything flows from that. Anyway, what can you do? It's a tough world. It's a tough position she's been putting out there. A good question, maybe an appropriate question would have been, why are you here in Korea? I mean, why is it that I'm able to interview you? If I'm in Korea, that means you're in Korea. What's happening here? Why are you here? And of course, the answer is, in addition to attending the closing ceremonies for the Olympics, she is on hand to brief the Koreans about the United States position on North Korea, which is, of course, entirely inappropriate. But whatever. Oh, she also doesn't have a permanent security clearance. She probably shouldn't have her eyes on those plans anyway. But what can you do? Like Michael says, Michael Musson tweets, let's face it, it's all statements by Trump are pretty much inappropriate everything. So, okay, top to bottom. No difference there. Daily Kos Radio is live now. Bill says so, and he's in Portland, Maine, not Korea, so you know it's got to be true. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, lists all the reasons why Ivanka Trump should win the Nobel Peace Prize, then spends the other 1 hour and 59 minutes and 59 seconds talking about other stuff. And the answer is, that's all I've got for why she should win the Nobel Peace Prize. I guess she's in Korea, and she was able to stay alive to this point. And though many millions of other people can go to Korea and stay alive, she did it with such aplomb and fashion sense, I should add, that why not? Let's go ahead and give it to her. Why not? She's a Trump. Why not? She knows the Trumps. She's in the inner circle. Give her a prize. Why not? Right? Trump himself, the big Trump, is apparently, I see this all over the place this morning too, another big news item. They need a new head for the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. And so Donald Trump, of course, has a private plane, which means he is a private pilot, which means there you go. It's literally the dumbest, or the easiest appointment he could make. I don't know whether they'll buy into it. I don't know whether they'll confirm him. I mean, I guess at some point you say, well, a pilot, might make an appropriate head of the FAA, and I don't know what kind of experience he has. I think they're pointing to his experience in having handled logistics for the Trump private air group and having made sure that the planes registered thereunder were in FAA compliance. It's more experience than I have, but and I don't know what they usually look for in an FAA head, but it's out there. I know a pilot. I'm going to make him. So that's all there is to it. Okay, we're going to test out our new system here today. We won't hear it right away, of course, because our music isn't going to play just yet. But Greg Dworkin is with us. That we'll hear. I think I may have straightened out the Skype problem. Should I just play music for you now, Greg, and see if you hear it?
I can still hear it, so it's
All
okay.
right.
I mean, I kind of like how it sounds. It's really catchy.
Yeah, okay.
But if the public doesn't hear it as I call in, that's very helpful to you because it makes the how the show works, totally invisible and professional.
Yes, no, that
I don't
problem
think
will
we're fooling
never be
anybody,
solved.
but it's good. It's a good step.
Yeah, I think we're stuck with that one, and I hope everyone likes that catchy and fun music, because I don't think Skype is ever going to give me a way to get rid of that. And it's not Skype's fault. They didn't design this to be used for the radio. But hopefully we have the problem solved. I have indications that we may have solved the problem of the break music being audible to you. So we'll see. Should I save it for break time, or should I play some music now? I don't know.
Yeah, let's go on break. Well, we'll be back in an hour and a half after we finish breakfast.
Yes, and at that point, I'll have finished presenting to the Koreans, and I'll be done. I'll be on my way back. Please don't ask me about sexual misconduct, whether anybody's father. If they're a father or had a father, I think it's an inappropriate question.
Well, Ivanka Trump's superpower, which actually makes her rather dangerous, is that she's actually very good at looking poised and in control, even when she knows nothing about what she's talking about.
Right, or she's otherwise supremely uncomfortable. Donald Trump trained her very well to just look like she's okay, even when he's making her terribly uncomfortable.
Right, but, just from a public relations point of view, and from a media point of view, it's hard to underestimate how important it is to look totally confident.
Oh, yeah.
And, when you're born into millions of dollars and you're raised that way, it's easy to be totally confident.
I guess so. It certainly adds a lot of confidence. I didn't see the reaction video, and I don't know how the rest of the interview went.
I don't pay attention to her, but I've seen her speak, and I'm just saying based on, what I've seen on the media.
I think you're right. I guess my question is, does Peter Alexander say, no, well, it really is an appropriate question, and, if you don't want to answer it,
Crystal says, gee, what a boss.
I guess, right? Yeah, he's really into Ivanka. But
but that's the point, compared to, stammering politicians who really ought not to ever be on TV. Yeah. She's very good.
If she fooled Peter Alexander, then I guess it's worth something. It's not like he's the gold standard. It's just that's who was there.
Speaking of the gold standard, other people actually stepping back and looking at it in an objective way really are saying that it's the North Koreans that won the gold medal for propaganda. And we really have to step up our game, and Ivanka ain't it. But, that's another story for another day.
All right. I don't know how many more days we're going to be talking about. Hopefully none for talking about North Korea. But
I think you spent too much time on her Nobel Prize, qualifications.
I did go over the limit that was set.
Well, should have been a break music or something. Let me tell you about some of the crazy things that are happening. Yes. It is Monday, so we have the whole weekend to look at crazy things. A bunch of polls, and we'll get to that. Some on Trump's performance, some on the gun stuff. But, the observation Ken Delanian made is that Rick Gates is being charged with a bunch of stuff, but he seems to be flipping and, as they used to say in the old gangster movies, singing like a canary. And Ken Delanian writes, while the charges to which Gates pleaded guilty carry a prison term of up to 71 months under federal guidelines, his agreement could result in probation if he cooperates substantially, Pete Williams, NBC reports.
Okay.
John Dean says Mueller is throwing everything he can against Manafort, including Gates, who can nail him. Increasingly, it appears Manafort is the link to Russian collusion. If Gates can testify that Manafort was acting with Trump's blessing, it's the end of the presidency, and that is substantial. That's John Dean's looking at it from an insider point of view who's somewhat familiar with presidential conspiracies. But I would just like to comment and point out it's really interesting to watch, just like with the release over the weekend of the Adam Schiff memo, in contradistinction to the Nunes memo. I actually had a tweet about the Adam Schiff memo. I don't know if you saw it. It's basically everything redacted. It says the only thing you could read is it says Nunes lied. And that's essentially what's in there. But Jonathan Turley, conservative legal analyst, writes basically a whole column about detail by detail by detail what Mueller is doing, in his opinion, has nothing whatsoever to do with collusion, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with Trump. He tries to make the case.
Okay.
If you look at every single thing that Mueller has said and go through it line by line, word by word, letter by letter, it's a scathing indictment of Paul Manafort. But that in and of itself is not linked in any way to Donald Trump.
Yeah, minus the whole campaign manager.
And he makes the case that when you go through it, Gates, it's all about Manafort. Manafort was amazing. It's an amazing conspiracy. There are crimes here that we never thought, but nothing of it has to do with Trump, he claims.
Well, it's an indictment of Manafort.
Right. So if the Russians really wanted to collude, who would they go to? The son or the son-in-law of Trump, or the lawyer who was receiving millions for years from Russian-backed figures? Now, this means there was collusion. Right now, the record makes those claims highly dubious, he says. However, the pilot charges and the Gates plea could be an effort to shake the one tree that's known to have had Russians in it. At this point, so in that case, he agrees with John Dean. At this point, the only thing more surprising than finding actual collusion would be such a conspiracy that didn't include Manafort. However, he's a hardened target. That's why Russians and Ukrainians gave him millions. Mueller could be trying to see if a plea and dozens of charges will finally shake Manafort and his evidence free. Don't forget, by the way, not in the article, but I'll add, that the other thing about Manafort keeping him quiet is that the Russians will kill him.
Yeah. That could
there's
happen.
that.
It's an outcome. It's out there.
Yeah. Alternatively, with his close associate taking the stand against him, Manafort has to presume a likelihood of conviction at 68, and facing almost that number of charges, Manafort may now face a limited choice between a guaranteed plea or the prospect of a pardon. That is precisely where Mueller wants him. So Turley sets up the case that Mueller has nailed Manafort, and there's no way Manafort to get out of it. But if you look at the letter of the indictments, there is nothing there that touches Trump. To which I add, we were talking about this online this morning on Daily Kos for the Pundit Roundup when I put it up. And you've heard me say this before, but let me just put it in a more clarified form. Here is my suggestion.
All right.
Take a personality test. There's a lot of them. There's free. They're online. And you can find out whether you are an S personality or an N personality. Now, the sensing intuition preference, S is sensing and N is intuition. The sensing intuition preference represents the method by which one perceives information. What I'm getting at here is Turley's an S. Sensing means an individual relies mainly on concrete actual information. Insofar as objects release sensations, they matter. So you have to be able to put your finger on it in order to claim yes. Whereas intuition means a person relies on their conception about things based on their understanding of the world. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about this before in terms of steps 1 through 10. How many steps do you have to take before you're ready to get to step 10? Mm-hmm. And some very smart people are so S that they cannot make that next leap unless it's right there in front of them in list form, outlined, bolded, in red. And Turley looks to be one of those people. You can give him all of the information there, but it's not there in right. There isn't a indictment, therefore it doesn't happen. It's not true. There's no evidence. Mm-hmm. That's basically what he's saying. And I think that there's some very, very good lawyers who are like that. There are even better lawyers who are a little bit more intuitive, who know that if you ask those next questions, you're not going to like the answers, so they don't ask. It's not that they can't see it. They don't want to know.
A lot of lawyers are very much like that. Of course, that's the job, is to lay out the facts and the evidence so that you can't avoid coming to the conclusion that the facts in evidence will lead you to. A lot of times the problems for those lawyers are jurors are N's, or more I guess more to the point here in this case is, in order to get yourself to the S case, you need a prosecutor or lead investigator who's an N, so he knows where to look to find the evidence it takes to convince S's. Eventually, if it shows up.
I think that's exactly right. And we see that in medicine as well. I teach this to my medical students when I'm trying to teach them how to take a proper history. Because, you have to know your own personality type, and you have to understand that the patient might not be a match with you. Mm-hmm. You have to do it their way, not your way.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good point too. Yeah. I mean, well, like if you are that S personality and you show up and say, well, I don't see any evidence, so goodbye. I don't know that you've done your job. If it's possible for an N personality to ferret out the evidence and then present it to you, you might be convinced. But if you show up and say, I don't see anything, that means there's nothing. Close the books.
It's not just lawyers, it's newspaper reporters.
Yes. That's true.
And so you get the idea here that maybe Blake Hounshell, who is a skeptic.
Yeah, right.
Might be an S, mm-hmm. And, you got to make that leap and say, okay, you've lined everything up here, but I just can't make that final, jump from step 8 to step 10 because you haven't given me step 9. Again, let's go back to medicine here. What I tell my medical students here is an example. If I'm an N doctor and you've given me enough information to make a diagnosis and the patient, in this case, a pediatrician, so the patient's mom, who's there in the office, is an S personality, and I jump too quickly into, okay, well, your kid has this, they're mad at me because I'm not listening. They've got like 5 other things to tell me. And it may or may not change my ultimate diagnosis. That's the trouble with N's. You can't skip over stuff that might turn out to be important. But if it turns out, it still leads to the same place.
Yeah.
And I listen to all of it. I'm a better listener and better doctor than if I just came to a conclusion after the first 2 or 3 things that all fit into the same place. So I've decided the same thing in my head. But with the person I'm working with, I have to, be a little bit more careful and not jump to things.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing with reporters talking to their readers. That's the same thing with lawyers trying to make a case to the jury. In this case, the jury, the court of public opinion. And so, there's a lot of truth to the idea that not everything is spelled out by Robert Mueller. Now, can you intuit that he actually knows more than he's telling us? I think so. Can you intuit that some of it might actually not look so good for the Trump family, be it money laundering or collusion with the Russians about having to protect that money laundering history? You could do that, and a lot of us have. Mm-hmm. But is the evidence there that Mueller has given us in these indictments? Not exactly, but not exactly not.
Yeah. Well, also there's probably pretty good reason not to lay that out too, because if you're dealing with people who on the other side are S's, and it's also their job to do everything they can to obfuscate and debunk, as long as you don't give them the information, they can't operate as S's, and they sit on their hands, and they have to wait for you to finally bring the charges, and then they can debunk them. That gives you a lot of operating room. And
absolutely. Absolutely. See, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not an expert in this. I certainly know people who are. I just think it's really helpful sometimes to look at it from a different point of view, use a different lens, if you will, to looking through a many-faceted crystal, and just try to get a sense of what's going on here.
What is going on here?
Well, I think that Mueller's making a case, and he's not done. And so to jump to the conclusion that everything we see is everything we know would be wrong.
Yes. Okay.
So we have that. Now, let me change gears here and talk to you about some other stories.
All right.
We have CPAC over the weekend.
Oh, yeah, right.
And 2 separate different interesting things came out of that.
All right.
Okay.
Name one.
And one of them is disrespecting Michael Steele, ex-Republican committee chair.
Right, RNC
chairman. Who happens to be African-American.
It's one big coincidence, but yes, he
is. So the spokesperson, I guess, for CPAC basically said that the only reason Michael Steele was hired is because he was black. He's basically a token hire, and it was a really big mistake.
Well,
Michael Steele took exception to that.
Do we say that's correct? I don't know.
Well, the guy wasn't fired. I think that's the news that really comes out of that.
Yeah, all right. You mean the spokesperson for CPAC?
The spokesperson was not fired, right?
Yeah,
the other thing that happened is that Mona Charen, you know Mona Charen.
Yeah, right.
She's a pundit. She's extremely conservative, very conservative,
right,
highly conservative.
All of those things.
And did actually an interesting thing. She came and she spoke at CPAC and said it's ridiculous for conservatives to back Trump or at least ignore the fact that he was a sexual predator. And it's even more ridiculous that conservatives in the Republican Party would back somebody like Roy Moore, who had very reasonable claims made against him in terms of sexual predation and child molesting. Pick your term at various ages. But she told that to the CPAC audience, who booed her. And then she wound up, and nobody seems to know exactly how this happened, she wound up with an armed escort to get out of there.
Oh, my. They had one handy, I guess.
They had one handy. There's big signs all over the place, no guns allowed.
But this guy, well, all right.
But they had one handy. So, I just think that that's a remarkable a remarkable set of events. And I have to say, and this, I don't know how to say this. She is extremely conservative. I do not support her politics. But it was really courageous, and I commend her for going to that audience in that setting, knowing she was going to get that kind of reception and saying what she said. That doesn't mean that I endorse anything or everything Mona Charen ever said. But, when you see it, you have to, acknowledge that. And, online, whenever you say something like this, well, what about these 9 other things that she said? I'm not endorsing them.
Right. It was a thing she did, and it's likely that it made her tremendously uncomfortable. Okay.
Yes, it made everybody tremendously uncomfortable, which is why it was good to do that.
So, okay, I'm glad that she did do it. Right, and I think that's the end of the Mona Charen thumbs up there.
I hope so for now, but, we'll see. Meanwhile, what's really happened to the Republican Party? I'll give you an idea of what's happened to the Republican Party. Remember Mitt Romney? He didn't go off knit, he actually is trying to get back into this thing.
I have a vague memory of him. Became the Republican chair now, after not too immediately following Michael Steele, but the next.
It's hard to remember because she changed her name.
Yeah. All right, so there's still some of those people involved in the party.
Mitt Romney is coming back, but you're not allowed to call her Romney anymore.
Right. Well,
so Trump this is from UtahPolicy.com, where political junkies get their daily fix.
If they're from Utah.
Right?
Right.
And the date is February 25th, 2018.
Okay. Yes,
and the story is chaos in the Utah GOP! Exclamation mark. Hardliners adopt a rule change that could kick Mitt Romney and other candidates out of the party.
All right.
Right? This has everything, David. It's processed. It's bizarre. And as the internet meme with Ron Paul says, with all the blinking lights, it's happening.
All right. So what?
Right.
What is the rule?
Okay. You may have thought the internal workings of the Utah Republican Party were really screwed up before. Let me just put this. I think I have it in there, but let me just put it at the bottom for you so you can find it easy.
You may have thought that.
And there it is.
Okay.
But get this. If former U.S. GOP presidential nominee Mitt Romney continues gathering signatures as part of his U.S. Senate run this year, he may well be kicked out of the Utah Republican Party because of a bylaw change adopted Saturday over the objections of party chairman Rob Anderson. And that's not all. After a, quote, special meeting, unquote, of the party's Central Committee Saturday.
Central Committee, yes.
Central Committee. Rob Anderson says CC, Central Committee members, new bylaw bifurcates the allowed candidate to ballot routes. One set of rules for U.S. House districts, another set of rules for 2 other House districts. Okay? And I think that violates both state law SB 54 and the U.S. Constitution's equal protection rights, said Anderson. But after Stuart Pay, the Snell and Wilmer attorney whom Anderson had had as the party's legal counsel, agreed, the Central Committee fired him.
Well, like firing a parliamentarian.
Yes, that's why I thought you'd find this so amusing. That's right, the story says. The Utah Republican Party doesn't have an attorney. Anderson said he'll fight on against the group of right-wing Central Committee members that are clearly out to get rid of him. I will not resign, he said, saying he's not trying to sound overdramatic, but really, I'm the only person standing now between the collapse of the Utah Republican Party if the right-wing group gains control of the state office, and that's the truth.
Wow. But take a vacation. it's a suggestion.
Now, the larger Central Committee, as I'm reading this story, can meet. But the trouble is that it's hard to meet on short notice. And so the hardliners keep calling these quick meetings where only they show up and then change the rules.
That is super clever, and people love it.
Yeah. The bylaw says if any GOP candidate accepts the signature route to the primary, he or she immediately loses the party membership.
Well, I'm not even... Okay.
So in other words, the Central Committee is trying to change it so that you get on the ballot if we say you're on the ballot.
Yeah.
I mean, if you try to go and collect signatures the old way and say you're on the ballot because of that, then you're out of the party.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, just to put a fine enough point, I don't think you can make a fine enough point on this thing. Oh, by the way, here comes the music. Do you hear the music today or no?
Yeah, I do.
All right. So excellent. All right. So that means we got 30 seconds to get. Now we got 20 seconds. Anyway, but yeah, how do you like that? Is that if you go to collect signatures to get on the ballot, Republicans will not allow you. That's the new rule. If you ask people, do they want you to run, and they say yes, you can't. That's democracy, I guess. I don't know. Well, we'll be back after this 2-minute break to discuss it again.
And David will explain it all.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Wow, what a weird story we left off with. I don't know whether we spend more time on this now or do more roundup stuff, but this is pretty fascinating. It's just sort of this. Well, I think you explained it correctly. The Central Committee members keep calling quick meetings that only the right wingers know about and are on hand to attend, which should probably be against the rules, but it seems to be too late to change the rules to be more inclusive, and they just change the rules for how you get on the ballot statewide. And what a weird thing to do, to just adopt the obviously they're aiming
but not for everybody. They only adopted it for certain House seats, but not other House seats.
Right. It appears that there's 4 House seats in Utah, and 2 of them you qualify for the ballot by gathering signatures, and 2 of them you do not. There's some other method of qualifying for the ballot. And so a statewide candidate who collects signatures in the 2 House seat districts where they don't use that method for House candidates.
They're going to set up a caucus, and then the caucus winners will go to the convention to vote on the candidates.
So I think
that's the other way to do it. In other words, you're going to do it based on the activists.
Yeah. And I guess that's up to the party to do.
How do you feel about caucuses?
Not a lot of people like caucuses. I don't know. They seem to like them.
It just got more interesting in terms of how you feel about caucuses. This is what they're doing.
You can't escape it. So this is interesting, though. So if you, I guess the thinking is, all right, in 2 of the districts, you get on the ballot by caucus. And those may be ones where, it's a closer call as between D and R. I'm not certain which ones they've chosen. But 2 of them you get on the ballot by caucus. 2 of them you can get on the ballot by signature gathering. And maybe that's the only way on. And so a statewide candidate, like for Senate, would have to gather signatures in 2 districts. But if you gather signatures from the other districts where they use the caucus, you're in violation of party rules and they kick you off and you can't be on the ballot.
But SB 54, the Utah law, says that the Utah Republican Party is a qualified political party, QPP.
Well, it isn't, but okay, yeah. It does say that.
And that means as a QPP, the state party must allow, not shall, but must allow all candidates to take both the signature gathering route or the caucus delegate convention route or both at the same time. And I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internets. But I have been taught there's a difference between shall and must. And this says must allow. And the new bylaw passed Saturday says the U.S. House 1st and 2nd districts, the only route to the GOP nominations through the caucus delegate convention route. And that's in violation of state law.
That is.
And if the lawyer tells him that, you're fired.
Problem.
Yeah, just like the parliamentarian that gives Mitch McConnell something he doesn't like.
That's cool. Now, I would say, okay, go ahead and fire him. I mean, I'm trolling you. But go ahead and fire him, and that gives Utah Democrats the opportunity at some point, and I don't know whether you wait until it's too late or spring on it now, but then at this point, I guess you go to court in Utah, cross your fingers, you get a judge that cares what state law says and say, this November, there's only one qualified political party in this state, and there can't be any Republicans on the ballot anywhere, no matter how they got there, signatures or otherwise.
So as an update, UtahPolicy.com, which is the site that I'm reading from, reached out to Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox about the change and what it could mean for the Utah GOP. Cox said he doesn't know what the ultimate effect will be until he has a chance to meet with lawyers from the Utah Attorney General's office. We'll be reviewing everything and the repercussions of their actions. So it's just odd. I mean, obviously, it's trying to set up purity tests.
I guess so.
And that's the term that this article uses. In contradistinction to getting your name on the ballot by signature. So big fight, and just it's one of those things that you should be aware of because it's out there and who knew, and then all of a sudden it may explode. So at least your readers will know what's going on here.
Next question is whether it's proper to be asking the Utah AG what to do about party rules.
Well, party rules have to run by state law.
Yeah. But I don't know. Well, I guess the state, and then he'd be talking about having the state of Utah sue the Republican Party of Utah, which might be okay. Yeah. It's just, all right, well, there's a lot of complications involved there. And I guess if it becomes an issue of are you using state resources to fix party problems, then you got another layer.
Right.
Okay.
So let's change subjects here a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the gun stuff. Josh Marshall had a very interesting observation. It's notable that most of the NRA's public messaging isn't even about firearms anymore. It's mostly culture war agitprop about fake news, Trump, obedience to the flag, feral leftists, socialists, Antifa street groups, and other similar incitement. This is for a clear reason. The terms of the gun debate have become so extreme that A, there's many more rights to argue for, and 2, it's hard to – no, he said B. I just threw in that A and 2 because I like to do that, right? It's hard to argue the absolutist case on the merits. The goal is increasingly to permanently and inextricably embed maximalist gun rights into the country's partisan polarization. So whatever the merits of particular merits of an argument, any defeat for guns is a defeat for Trump. Any defeat for guns is a defeat for the flag, the police, traditional families, racial order, and all the rest. The culture war and partisan polarization now backstop maximalist gun rights. Ergo, any intensification of the culture war and partisan polarization protects gun maximalism. And you have to put that in the context of everything that Trump does. He's a culture warrior. That's why he's there. Yeah. That's why he has his 35 to 38% support. They want a culture war. They want to support him in the culture war. They don't care about him, his personal peccadillos. They don't care about his morality. They don't care about his competence. They don't care about anything. They don't care about his policies. They just want him to fight the culture war, and that's why his numbers don't erode in the face of sheer incompetence and malfeasance.
Yeah, I would think that's probably the right assessment.
So, that's what we expect. Again, however, that doesn't mean that his numbers can't go up or down. Basically, he's got his core, 20, 25% will support him no matter what, and there's another 10% or 12%, and that number will go up and down based on, I hate Trump, but I like this policy. I like getting a tax cut. It's a conservative policy, and I'm an independent who used to call himself a Republican, and so I like that. So his numbers go up. And then he does something incredibly stupid, like with Charlottesville or like with Florida, and then his numbers go down again. And so that's what we wind up seeing. The CNN poll that came out over the weekend, for example, Trump approval slides matches lowest point of presidency. USA Today, Suffolk. Trump also at the lowest point in that particular poll. CNN has him at 35, and Suffolk has him at 38. Is that a new he's dropping again? Actually, Charles Franklin had a wonderful discussion about all of this, and I do have that there. Basically, if you get your polling numbers with IVR, which is robopolling, with a little online supplement there, you have Trump at about 48.
I see.
That includes Rasmussen. If it's an internet-only poll like YouGov, you have him at 42. And if it's a live phone, then the average is 38. So depending upon how you measure it, that's how you're going to see the results of the polling. And Mike McDonald points out it isn't just a matter of the mode, which kind of polling that you do.
Yes.
It's also a question of how these individual polls determine who's a likely voter.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right.
Sure.
So if you're going by, well, I voted in the last election 4 years ago, you're a likely voter, it's going to be much more Republican. The fact that you have a whole bunch of new Democrats signed up, Democratic enthusiasm for people who don't usually vote and so on and so forth,
yes.
You're going to miss that. And you're going to overestimate how popular Trump or the Republican generic ballot is. So that's one of the reasons why you can have polling going into, let's say, Alabama showing Roy Moore with a slight lead, and then he loses.
Right. That is
a lot of that was IVR polling, which tends to overestimate Republicans, and it misses the new voters because of the likely voter model that are just so ticked off they're going to go and vote this time, whereas they usually don't. That might include, for example, people who are about to turn 18, people who are about to turn 18 who happen to live in Florida, who are internet savvy and might have been, in the news lately.
Yeah. There are a lot of them, although,
3 million every year.
Yeah. Oh, is that right? 3 million every year?
3 million turn 18 every year.
Okay.
They don't all register. They don't all vote. But what if they did?
Yes. Well, that's true. Plus, we have the still anticipating a wave of those. I guess we could call them refugees from Puerto Rico who may or may not be registering in Florida.
Right? Felonies, people who otherwise might be able to vote in Florida that couldn't before.
True. Also. Yeah,
there's a number of things that are going on, and they're all kind of interesting.
Yes. Now, what if you get your polling about Trump's approval rating from Fox News, or particularly
Fox
Judge
News polling
Jean
is actually
Pirro?
very good and includes a telephone.
Well, Fox News polling. I happen to.
Fox News tends to cover Fox News polls, so you get that information out there.
Well, I just happen to have this great screen grab. I think the president made an appearance on, or I don't know whether he phoned in or whatever.
Jean Pirro. Janine Pirro interviewed him.
Yeah, and let him know
so
that his
great. You're doing so wonderful. All the polls say you're doing fantastic.
And they displayed a poll result here. Do you approve or disapprove of the job that Trump is doing as president? Approve, 93%. Amazing.
That was the CPAC straw poll.
Yeah, and it does, of course, say that at the bottom. But of course, for the Fox viewers who can't see
older people who watch right. Fox News cannot read.
What does that say? Right. So his soaring approval ratings is what her question was. How do you feel about your soaring approval ratings? 93% approval.
I know that because I'm older and I can't read it.
Yeah. Well, so I thought that was an interesting thing, and the Fox viewers will have had that handed to them, and then when they come back and read that it's even if they read Rasmussen that he's in the 40s, they'll say, fake news, it's all lies, etc. I saw the real news over the weekend. She's a judge, so she has to be fair and impartial. 93%
She hates the FBI because it indicted her husband, but she's fair and impartial.
Right, exactly why. And of course, remember, they love culture war and supporting cops, unless the cops are employed by the federal government, or if they are local cops and they didn't do what you wanted them to do, like stop a mass shooting, for instance, then they're cowards and horrible people.
As President Trump sends, this is from the USA Today story, as President Trump sends mixed signals about what he'll support when it comes to gun legislation, his approval rating has fallen to its lowest level in the USA Today survey since he was inaugurated last year.
But also the highest level ever for anybody in the history of China.
Right, but don't forget, you keep hearing all these, Trump is making a comeback. Just 38% now approve of the job he's doing as president, 60% disapprove. That's his natural where he belongs, is 38%.
Well, all right. I think 0, but I get your point.
That's a steep drop from the president standing a year ago. And then 47% approval, high watermark in the poll. What's more, the intensity of feeling is hardening against the president. This is where this likely voter stuff comes in. Because the polls don't, unless you ask, measure intensity. Now the percentage who strongly disapprove of him is more than double the percentage who strongly approve, 39 to 16. You could argue that strongly approve 16, that's his core. Those are the people who go to the rallies.
That's probably true.
They're a small number. A new CNN poll, here's again, I was just looking at the Gallup numbers from this month.
Yes.
Something like 22% Republican, 32% Democrat, 44% Independent. So everybody who analyzes this from the point of view of, but the Republicans are sticking with him, it's only 22% of identified party goers. They can stick with him. Well, if everybody else deserts him, he loses.
What if they are not a qualified party? This is a simple
concept that literally people cannot seem to understand because there's this whole pundit write-up this morning, I guess it was in The Hill, it was in Politico, about how Trump is winning.
Oh. Okay, well, that would make...
Because the Democrats don't have anybody to run against him, and who's going to stop him?
I don't understand what that means.
I don't understand it at all. He's really doing incredibly poorly.
They don't have anyone to run against him? Like, we haven't made our nomination yet? Is that the...
Exactly. And what are the policies and this, that, and it's stupid stuff. But then again, it's the punditry stupidity.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, still, they shouldn't print that, but they do.
So the new CNN poll, USA Today, goes on to say, released Sunday, puts Trump approval at 35%, his lowest level in that survey. So on guns, a nation that is often divided on issues is remarkably united by almost 2-1, 61 to 33. They say tightening gun control laws and background checks would prevent more mass shootings in the U.S. By more than 2-1, 63 to 29, they say semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 used by the Florida shooter should be banned. Now, the problem with that is that it's hundreds of millions of weapons.
Yes, right. I don't mind, but it's true.
By more than 6-1, 76 to 12, they say people who have been treated for mental illness should be banned from owning a firearm. Interesting thing about that is that one of the reasons, and I don't think they polled the age limits, but if they had, they would have found age limits and banning people treated for mental illness would be high because Trump is behind it, and therefore Republicans are behind it. And Democrats are already behind it. And independents don't find any reason not to be behind it, so it becomes very popular.
Okay.
And in fact, because of that, and because of that reasoning, the Daily 202 today says the big idea, a spike in support for stricter gun laws is a testament to the power and possibility of presidential leadership.
Wow.
I don't necessarily buy this interpretation. I think it's because of the Florida kids. But there's something to it in the sense that if you want to bring Republicans along with you, it really helps to have a Republican president making the case for these small changes, improving the background check stuff, raising the age to buy a long gun to 21, and banning people who clearly are mentally ill from getting a gun. Maybe that even might include, people who are under court order to stop stalking your ex-spouse, that kind of thing, domestic violence and other stuff. So small things like that might happen because a Republican president is backing them, even despite the fact that the NRA is not happy with it. Right. So in that sense, the report might be correct. But again, it's very Washington-centric and suggests that what really matters is only what Republicans think, which is the thing that annoys me most about our American press.
Yeah, well, that's and it's particularly shaky to overlay that on the Trump presidency for a number of reasons, not the least of which, of course, is the number of people we found out who supported Trump and still support Trump, and they'll interview them any number of times in their bars and diners to restate that they support him. But I didn't think he was going to do this, and I don't like it.
Exactly. So James Hohmann, who writes the piece, says, there are many reasons to doubt that the president has the will or backbone to prod a reluctant GOP-controlled Congress to follow through.
Yes.
Or that he has the stomach for a battle with his patrons in the gun lobby. But his tweets and other public comments, combined with the sympathetic student survivors who have been agitating for action relentlessly on television, are undeniably changing people's minds. CNN pollster Jen Agesta says, bumps in support for tighter laws following mass shootings have rarely lasted, but they have also rarely been as large as the shift seen in this poll. The new poll also finds deepening intensity of support for stronger gun laws. A majority of 52% say they strongly favor stricter gun laws, well above the previous high of 37% back in 2013. Oh, that was right after Sandy Hook. Overall support for stricter laws includes a majority of those who live in gun-owning households, 57%, as well as majorities across gender, race, and age categories. Other polls have shown that in males, and gun owners and non-college educated. A remarkable 64% of respondents said the government and society can take action that will effectively prevent shootings like the one in Parkland, higher by far than the share to say so in CNN polls after Las Vegas, Orlando, Charleston, or Newtown, and Tucson. Majorities across party lines say they feel effective action can be taken, including 79% of Democrats, 59% of independents, and again, they're the ones that decide elections, and 52% of Republicans. So that's actually pretty good. And then he's got some other polling numbers here. Viewed another way, the shift in polling also underscores the tribalism that's become so endemic in American politics. Because Trump is the leader of the red team, most Republicans no longer care too much about deficits, and they've changed their minds about the benefits of legal immigration. They've also less committed to traditionally family values, among other things, and I would also throw trade in there too. Okay. To be sure, just because 7 in 10 people support stricter laws doesn't mean that'll come to fruition, but it is an interesting observation, and actually something might happen this time, and if so, those are the reasons.
All right, yeah, that's a good point. I guess the next question is, do 7 in 10 or even 6 in 10 Republicans favor it, and do 6 in 10 Republicans in Congress favor it so that we can use the child molester rule and get something passed, or what? We don't know yet. And of course, over or underlying all of this is I hate to be this, LOL, nothing matters about things, but what if next week Trump says that is not his position and never was?
Well, then things will change, but the idea is to get stuff done. In the meantime, and again, as long as you have this relentless pressure on the NRA, you have corporate sponsors who are pulling their
that's right.
Little gains. If you're an NRA member, you get this discount or that discount.
Yes,
you definitely have the NRA on the defensive, which is why Wayne LaPierre was so insane. If that mental health rule passes, LaPierre won't be able to be eligible to have a gun.
Entirely possible.
Because he's entirely insane.
Speaking of Utah, Clark Aposhian, who's the head of their, what passes for the local Utah NRA, the Shooting Sports Council out there. A lot of people could be in trouble. And the mental health thing was the NRA's idea at one point, although I did learn over the weekend that it was also their idea post-Columbine to back gun-free school zones.
Yeah, turn them into prisons, get rid of trees, put bars on the windows, harden the schools, so to speak.
Sure.
So before I leave, I'm just going to leave you with this one last one because it puts the whole arming teachers in perspective thing. This is from Amarillo, Texas, over the weekend in the Houston Chronicle.
Yes.
Texas police shoot man who disarmed possible church shooter. Police in Amarillo shot an innocent man who helped foil a possible church shooting. The shooting happened shortly after 9 a.m. February 14th at the Faith City Mission, faith-based outreach organization. Police said Joshua Len Jones, 35, barged into a church building, pulled out a gun, and was holding about 100 congregants and church staff hostage. In the time between when police were dispatched and when officers arrived, a handful of churchgoers wrestled him to the ground. One of the congregants was able to grab Jones' gun, and then you can imagine what happened next.
Yeah.
Officers entered the building, saw a churchgoer holding the gun, and opened fire.
Yeah, I did read about that.
Was hospitalized in stable condition.
And if you were wondering why didn't I hear about that, part of the answer is it happened on February 14th, 2018, which is the same day that we heard about the shooting at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, because it was the same day.
Which dominated the news a little bit,
Yeah.
but I just threw that in there because when people say to me, well, why shouldn't we arm the teachers? We have volunteers who are very, very carefully trained. What could go wrong?
And we've answered that a million times. One of the things, of course, is this. And the other things we've answered. And I wrote it up finally for Daily Kos. So for those of you who are not here listening to the show, I am mentally telling you, go pick up the answer in the pieces, well, several pieces that many people have written explaining what could go wrong. And I explain what has gone wrong, again, in Utah. Utah, it's central to today's broadcast, where, of course, the armed teachers have been getting training for some time and have shot themselves and have already demonstrated that the school administrations will have no interest in enforcing the safety rules that we are told make it all okay.
So with that, I think I'll just end it and do it cold. This is great work, and speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. Thanks so much for listening to us. I won't be here on Wednesday. I've got some morning meetings, which are centered around switching to a new electronic medical record system, which everybody's really thrilled about.
It's like the 9th one.
And I will be back on Thursday.
Okay, excellent. We can handle that. How many times have you changed electronic medical records things? It feels like, or maybe you meet about it a lot.
No, I went from paper charts to electronics, and this is the first major switch of that system to a different system, except for the little system switches in between.
This is the first one except for the others.
Well, there's the office system, and then there's the hospital system, so it depends which one you're talking about. But
all right. Well,
it's
it
no
changes
fun,
in
let's
every
just put it
congressional district, as I understand it. And
it's the kind of thing that makes you want to retire. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.
All right. Thanks very much, Greg. We are well started here, and I am so glad that the music finally works again. Don't ask why it works again. You know what I did? I redid the things that I did last time. So either something changed, which I guess is, honestly speaking, probably the less likely, or my run-through of the process last time was somehow flawed, and only in running through the same process again to double-check did I do the process correctly the first time, we come to the answer, which is no, and you might have been able to correct this much earlier had you doubted your process the first time. But being such a process guy, it was hard to come to the conclusion that I had run the process incorrectly or had overlooked something at the very least the first time around. However, it is a good lesson for you, even if you consider yourself a very careful, detail-oriented, procedure-oriented person. There's always the possibility, if there's no other explanation, there's always the possibility that you got the procedure wrong despite it all, and procedure should probably be that you do it all again anyway. That's what we did, and we've fixed it. So there's a lesson in there for everyone, including me, but now don't ever bring that up again. Thank you. So, yeah, there's a lot we can collect from, any number of the stories that we went over today. The church shooting one was eye-opening in that, once again, and this is part of what I wrote up over the weekend, and I guess I should do everybody the favor, if that's what it is, of putting that in the summary so that everybody can see what I'm referring to. You will have read you might not even need it. I'll put it in there, but you might not even need it. And several people commented in the comments, because that's where you comment, that they already knew all of this, because they listened to the show. I had explained everything, but it was a recap of all the things we talked about on the show that people who don't listen to the show, for whatever reason, might not have gotten yet, and lots of interesting observations on it. But yeah, Utah, very instructive in that sense, as showing you what could go wrong. And, I imagine that there would be some pushback from Utah gun rights enthusiasts, and they would be justified in saying, well, we did start the program in 2003, and it wasn't until 2014 that any teachers accidentally shot themselves. That we know of, I guess, is another thing that I learned from putting that piece together and listening to Greg's summary here. I mean, I think everybody who's been worried about armed society has worried for a long time that it was likely that police would become confused when they arrived at an active shooting scene if anyone other than the shooter were armed for whatever reason, either because they came to the situation armed to begin with, or because they wrestled away a gun during the confrontation. Sure enough, you can get shot. And all the other things that people imagine could go wrong, too. Shooting at a suspect, missing and hitting the wrong person. We have examples of that happening around the country, not in classrooms per se, and so I guess S people, and I love that because you know how we abbreviate things here on the show when we can't say the word aloud. So all the S people, all the different pieces of S out there, the pieces of the S entirety, that is, who don't believe in this, I forgot our outro music here. We're a little bit late on that, so we'll cut out a little earlier than usual. But yeah, I guess all the people who need to see it demonstrated in a classroom. Well, you said that you could shoot the wrong person in a classroom, and you showed me them shooting outside a classroom. That doesn't count. Well, we'll try and fix that after the break. Well, we took an extra long break there. That was much more than I expected to have to take, but small emergency came up. But we are back here on the Kagro in the Morning show. Normally, as we know, that it's only a 1-minute break, but not only did the music come up late, that being my own fault, but, a little home emergency there. But nothing major, no major damage done. Nobody hurt. We're okay, but for having missed a few moments of the show. But I'll tell you what, now would be a good time, perhaps. Again, no major emergency, but there's still a little bit of cleanup to do here for me to bring in some assistance. While we're on this subject, I mean, we'll skip subjects a little bit here, go to a different aspect of the same subject, and we'll stick to it just for a few minutes on guns. I've got the contribution of Steve Sittig here, and I am assured that is the proper pronunciation of his last name. It's Sittig, and normally we would all say Sittig, but it's Sittig. Steve Sittig has got this on, just to bring us back up to speed on Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and not the high school per se, but the person behind the school's name, which this will help me, I think, get the name right from here on in. Just an interesting backgrounder, and though it doesn't have anything directly to do with guns, it does help, in a way, set some context for the tenacity with which the students there have approached these issues. I find it a stretch, perhaps, to say, well, that all students take on the attributes of the person for whom the school is named. That is unlikely to be the case, but it is an interesting item to note, I guess. And although I have heard from a few people who say, growing up in Florida, you would almost certainly have heard her name and be familiar with who she was and what she did and how she did it and why. but outside of Florida, that might not be the case. Well, now let everybody outside of Florida who's at least listening to the show or speaks to people who listen to the show, you can pass this information on, know a little bit more about the person behind the name. I'll let Steve take it from here. But those of you in the know might be struck by this as I begin to play the tape and let Steve take over the show for a little bit. It is listener Steve Satig and not the reincarnation of Frank Zappa. I don't know if it'll strike you the same way, but I told Steve, has anybody ever, I've asked him, did anybody ever tell you sound just like Frank Zappa? And those of you who are familiar with his voice might be struck by this. So fair warning, trigger warning if you are, if you might have a heart attack thinking Frank Zappa faked his own death and is still alive. Steve, Frank, whoever it is, take it away.
Hi, David. It seems you've been struggling like all of us have lately with the name Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the namesake of the school in Parkland, Florida, where the shooting occurred. And I found an article in the American Prospect that might help. The author, Peter Dreyer, teaches politics and chairs the Urban and Environmental Policy Department at Occidental College. His latest book is The 100 Greatest Americans of the 20th Century, a Social Justice Hall of Fame. In this article, he says, there's nothing on the Parkland, Florida Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School website about the woman whose name adorns the school, so its students may not realize that in rising from last week's tragedy to speak truth to power, they are following in Douglas's activist footsteps. Douglas would certainly see a bit of herself in Emma Gonzalez, the poised and eloquent young woman whose speech electrified her classmates, teachers, parents, and the whole country at a Fort Lauderdale rally on Saturday, only days after a gunman entered her school and killed 17 people. If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, said the 18-year-old senior, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association. Douglas, who challenged the political and business establishment of her day, would be proud of the students' courageous efforts to galvanize a movement for gun control, which now includes a nationwide walkout by students and teachers scheduled for April 20th. Douglas was a journalist, writer, feminist, environmentalist, and progressive activist best known for her staunch defense of the Everglades against efforts to drain it and reclaim land for development. Born in Minneapolis in 1890, Douglas attended Wellesley College, where she earned straight A's and was elected class orator, graduating in 1912. It was at Wellesley that she first got involved in the women's suffrage movement. In 1915, she moved to Miami to work for the Miami Herald, which was owned by her father. The next year, she joined the American Red Cross in Europe in the midst of World War I. She spent much of her time writing articles for the Associated Press from France, Italy, and the Balkans. When the war ended, she remained in Paris to care for displaced war refugees. That experience, she later wrote in her autobiography, helped me understand the plight of refugees in Miami 60 years later. Returning to Miami in 1917, Douglas continued working at the Herald and jumped into the struggle for women's rights. That year, she traveled to Tallahassee with 3 other women to campaign for the women's suffrage amendment before Florida state legislators. We had to speak to a committee of the House, which we did, she recalled in 1983 interview. It was a big room with men sitting around 2 walls of it with spittoons between every 2 or 3. And we had our best clothes and we spoke as we felt eloquently about women's suffrage, and it was like speaking to blank walls. All they did was spit in the spittoons. They didn't pay any attention to us at all. Although the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution giving women the vote was adopted in 1920, Florida did not officially ratify it until 1969. Post-World War I, Miami was still a small southern city governed by Jim Crow laws with fewer than 20,000 residents. Many Miami police officers were members of the Ku Klux Klan, which was gaining momentum. One night, Douglas was driving back from the beach with her father when they came upon the KKK preparing to march in their masks and sheets. A masked man on horseback rode up from in front of my father and said, "This street is closed," and my father said, "Get out of my way," and drove right straight ahead, through them, and scattering them and everything. They couldn't stop him, she recalled years later. We were all yelling and screaming in defiance. We were so mad. Despite his liberal sympathies, Douglas's father initially relegated her to writing the paper's society page, covering weddings, tea parties, and other so-called women's issues. She rebelled, insisting on covering more hard-hitting topics, and was soon writing editorials, columns, and articles that expressed her concern for civil rights, better sanitation, women's suffrage, and responsible urban planning. In 1923, she wrote a ballad lamenting the death of a 22-year-old vagrant who was beaten to death in a labor camp, titled "Martin Tabert of North Dakota is Walking Florida Now." That was printed in the Herald and read aloud during a session of the Florida legislature, which passed a law banning convict leasing in large part due to her writing. After leaving the Herald to become a freelance writer in 1923, she published more than 100 short stories and nonfiction articles in the Saturday Evening Post and other popular magazines, as well as several novels and a number of books on environmental topics. Her most influential work, the 1947 bestseller The Everglades, River of Grass, changed forever the way Americans look at wetlands, according to her New York Times obituary. The book transformed popular views of the Everglades from a worthless swamp to a treasured river. Many environmentalists have compared it to Rachel Carson's influential book, Silent Spring, published 15 years later. There would most likely be no Everglades wilderness without her, the Times noted. In 1941, Douglas wrote the foreword to the Works Project Administration's Guide to the Miami Area, part of the New Deal's controversial Depression-era Federal Writers Project American Guide series, designed both to provide jobs for out-of-work writers and to compile detailed histories and descriptions of the nation's cities, regions, and cultures. Douglas served as the Miami Herald's book review editor from 1942 to 1949 and as editor for the University of Miami Press from 1960 to 1963. According to a profile of Douglas in the National Park Service website, in the 1950s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers rose to the top of her list of enemies. In a major construction program, a complex system of canals, levees, dams, and pump stations was built to provide protection from seasonal flooding to former marshland, now being used for agriculture and real estate development. Long before scientists became alarmed about the effects on the natural ecosystems of South Florida, Mrs. Douglas was railing at officials for destroying wetlands, eliminating sheet flow of water, and upsetting the natural cycles upon which the entire system depends. To do battle with the Army Corps of Engineers and others in 1969, at the age of 79, Douglas founded Friends of the Everglades. One of its first campaigns was to protest the construction of a jetport in the Big Cypress portion of the Everglades. President Richard Nixon scrapped funding for the project due to the efforts of Douglas and her environmentalist colleagues. She continued to work to preserve the Everglades for the rest of her life. Her tireless activism earned her the nickname Grande Dame of the Everglades, as well as the hostility of agricultural and business interests looking to benefit from land development in Florida. In 1948, angered by the fact that many black residents of Coconut Grove, the racially segregated section of Miami, had no running water or sewers, Douglas led a successful campaign to pass a law requiring all Miami homes to have toilets and bathtubs. She also set up a loan operation for the black residents of Coconut Grove to borrow money interest-free to pay for plumbing work. Douglas was a charter member of the South's first American Civil Liberties Union chapter in the 1950s. In the 1970s, she campaigned for the Equal Rights Amendment, urging the state legislature to ratify it. In 1974, she co-founded the Friends of the Miami-Dade Public Libraries and served as its first president. In the 1980s, Douglas lent her support to the Florida Rural Legal Services, a group that worked to protect migrant farm workers, especially those employed by the sugarcane industry near Lake Okeechobee. In 1985, Douglas campaigned to get the Dade County School Board to provide a building for the Biscayne Nature Center. 6 years later, the Florida Department of Education endowed $1.8 million for the Marjory Stoneham Douglas Biscayne Nature Center in Crandon Park. The headquarters of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in Tallahassee is called the Marjory Stoneham Douglas Building. Broward County named its new high school for the 100-year-old Douglas in 1990. Among many awards, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton in 1993. She died at age 108 in 1998. Well, I think that's enough detail. I hope this was helpful.
I think it was, Steve. Thanks very much. And in addition to giving me an opportunity to take a pause and set things straight here in the Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, I appreciate knowing all the background. It's a very it's a strong backgrounder on Marjory Stoneman Douglas and makes a lot of sense, certainly of the question of, why would a high school be named for her? Although really that's not a super, important question, but okay. But given the fact that it was named for her, we'd like to know a little bit more about her. And sounds like exactly the sort of person who would take great pride in the activism of the students there now. And they have to continue to spend about half of their time defending themselves from stupid charges like that they are crisis actors, whatever that may be. And by the way, I think that also is projection all the way down, as it usually is. Dana Loesch, put out front by the NRA. If she's not a crisis actor, I don't know what she is. I mean, when do you see Dana Loesch? Is it not in a crisis for the NRA? Does she not step up and act for the NRA when they are in crisis. Not exactly what they think we are supposed to think about what a crisis actor is, but she shows up at every single one of these things. I think she's pretty much fulfilling the same role. Okay, so let's see. When we left off, we were, I was right before the break, pondering again the differences between N's and S's. And I guess I should say for the record that there's nothing wrong with one type or another. And in fact, they team up very well, very often. And a good set of investigators, let's say, who are N types, who can coherently, in their own minds anyway, speculate about where all of the facts that S types value so highly might lead you to, and give you an idea of where you should be looking a little bit out front of the investigation and see if you can't construct a coherent theory of whatever it is you're investigating, whether it's a crime or any other sort of mystery. And you're very likely as an N person to be able to find other areas that might bear fruit, but, and even though you may uncover factual information that would be convincing to an S-type person that this other node in the story makes good logical sense, you'll still need to double check with S people as to whether or not you have made the connection as between the node from which you began and the node on which you landed thanks to your intuitive powers. You got to go back and make sure that the groundwork is laid for bringing the S's along with you. And as a matter of fact, listener to the show, I think, or maybe just replying to Maureen, who is listening to the show, Maureen having commented earlier that there is, she believes, a 2-to-1 ratio of S in the population. I guess more than she believes. It sounds like the sort of thing that she would have come across, stated as statistical fact somewhere. 2-to-1 ratio of S in the population, signed an INTP, the N being the intuitive. And all of this, intuitive thinkers upset S or sensor thinkers because they cannot see how you got there. Jill Grochi, who tweets as Aunt Jill, I don't know whether she's listening to the show or not. If so, welcome. If not, you should start, I think. But replying to Maureen saying, I'm an N, and I worked with an S for years, and he encouraged me to state my points, honored them, and then we'd discuss how he was going a step at a time and whether we got to the same place, and they made a good team. And I'll bet that they did. I think they would, N's and S's, well, probably opposite ends of spectrums of all sorts, generally speaking, if they're able to work together on a personal level, would make good teams. You double check one another's work. So there's certainly room for all of those things. Joel Roberts checks in to say, Steve sounds like Zappa. I think so too. I'm not crazy, right? He really does. And for full transparency, I edited the tape a little bit, and maybe I think I even overdid it. I was trying to help it clean it up because, of course, Steve said, there are one or two gaps in here, and, I hope it's okay for the show. And I went to eliminate those gaps because why should he have to deal with those if I got the time to edit it? He sent this to me on Friday. It wasn't going to air until at least Monday, so I took a moment. And then I thought, if I edit it real tight and get rid of pauses of all sorts and drawing breath in between and any stumbles that most of us go through when we're reading from prepared text, then I can get the piece edited down to, a slightly shorter, save us some time. But with all the natural pauses in particular, it sounded quite like Frank Zappa. So anyway, glad we have some confirmation on that. Thank you, Joel. Speaking of N's and S's and sort of seeing connectivity when it's there versus either being unable to or unwilling to, there was a lot of speculation about which was happening here. Was it unwillingness or inability to see connections? Natasha Bertrand, reporter for The Atlantic, staff writer, I guess is what they go with on The Atlantic, reporting or commenting rather, on reporter Manu Raju's point for CNN. Manu noting here six GOP chairmen of key panels tell us they see little reason to dig into Trump family finances or made no commitment to do so. They call it a fishing expedition or something in Mueller's purview. Dems say it is essential to the Russia probes. This a piece, linked here that he reported along with. This only takes me to his tweet. All right. Well, okay. Reported along with Jeremy Herb. I don't know whether he says herb like silent H or herb, but the two of them put this piece together, I guess. In probes, GOP draws line at Trump's finances. I might want to take a look at that at some point in the future. But more to our point, Natasha then commenting on Manu's piece by saying they got this quote out of Mike Conaway, the Texas Republican leading the House Russia investigation. I guess, is he the one that stepped in the supposed recusal of Devin Nunes? Is that how this happened? Anyway, he writes or says, I don't see the link at this stage. Deutsche Bank is a German bank. I don't see the nexus. I mean, that's basic. Is he saying it's a German bank and Donald Trump is American and you think he colluded with Russia? What would a German bank have to do with anything? That seems like a pretty S thing to say, to lean on our abbreviations as well. But honestly, should you be investigating what a German bank is doing operating in the United States when we have so many Americans who would love those banking jobs? Are they coming and stealing our jobs? Is that what's happening here? I mean, what would prevent you from understanding why a German bank that operates globally, but in addition in the United States, that has lent money to Trump, and everybody knows they've lent money to Trump, and everybody knows that they're the only bank that would do it? Isn't that the link? I mean, to sit there and say, Deutsche Bank, German, what's the point, is either willful blindness or S in the extreme, I guess we could say. All right, so let's see. What other things do we have to round up here? I've got so many different pages open here that, it's hard to know what to get to next. Let's jump over to Pocket and check in on a couple other stories here. I have also in my pocket a piece suggested by Rebecca Romans, who has sent us, what a surprise, she tweets, said no one on the left. Speaking of, the New York Times opinion piece tweeted with this message: Trump and Republicans in Congress spun an implausible tale about corporate tax cuts being good for workers. Now we have confirmation that it was all a fantasy. That is a switch in gears, but very well worth our time, I think. Except I guess we have to note at the outset, it's the New York Times editorial board, and they're so weird and inconsistent and hit or miss. It's hard to appreciate it even when they hit, but they got problems over there at the New York Times. Let's take a look at this one, unsigned except attributed to the entire editorial board. We might as well look at it. It's a topic of interest. Rebecca's entirely right about that. After President Trump signed the Republican tax cut into law, companies put out cheery announcements that they were giving workers bonuses because of their expected windfalls from the tax reductions. The president and Republican lawmakers quickly held up these news releases as vindication for their argument that cutting the top federal corporate tax rate to 21% from 35% would boost workers' income, even as it added $1.5 trillion to the debt that future generations would have to pay off. Now, corporate announcements and analyst reports confirm what honest observers always said. This claim is pure fantasy. As executives tell investors that they intend to do with their tax savings and their spending plans are tabulated into neat charts and graphs, the reports jibe with what most experts said would happen. Companies are rewarding their stockholders. Not their stakeholders, their stockholders. Workers are stakeholders, stockholders are stakeholders, but stockholders are stockholders. and the money goes to them. And everybody knew that it would. Businesses are buying back shares, which creates demand for the stocks, boosts share prices, and benefits investors. Some of the cash is going to increase dividends, and a chunk will go to acquiring other businesses, creating larger corporations that face less competition. In addition to benefiting investors, these maneuvers will end up boosting the pay of top executives because their compensation packages are often tied to the price of their company's stock. Finally, a small sliver of the money will find its way into paychecks of rank-and-file employees, but it won't be a big boost, and it'll probably come in the form of a temporary bonus rather than a lasting raise. That's something to think about, too. I'll give you a bonus of $1,000. Not a raise of $1,000, because that means you'll come back to me for the extra $1,000 next year. Temporary bonus? Easy. Morgan Stanley analysts estimated that 43% of corporate tax savings would go to buybacks and dividends, and nearly 19% would help pay for mergers and acquisitions. Just 17% would be used for capital investment, and an even smaller share, 13%, would go toward bonuses and raises. That's the lowest item on the list, isn't it? Other Wall Street analysts have issued similar reports. If more evidence was needed, Axios reported that just 9 pharmaceutical companies have announced $50 billion in buybacks since the tax law was passed. Mr. Trump might argue that it doesn't much matter that the tax cuts will be a boon for investors because many Americans own stocks. The president has recently touted the rising value of 401k accounts as a benefit of the tax law, but roughly half of all families own no stock, and most people have holdings that are worth less than $5,000. Most stock holdings, a whopping 84%, are in the hands of people whose incomes put them in the top 10% of households. Republicans might further argue that none of this matters because the tax law is becoming more popular as people learn more about it. Indeed, a recent poll for the Times found that the law now has more supporters than opponents, but this swing in public sentiment might be less important than it appears. Consider the results of a recent Politico Morning Consult poll that shows that just 25% of registered voters said they noticed an increase in their paycheck because of lower tax withholding, while 51% had not. The poll also found that high-income people were more likely to notice that their take-home pay had gone up. That's because Republicans designed the law to principally benefit wealthy families while offering crumbs to low-income and middle-class families. Those crumbs, by the way, disappear after a few years. Further, many taxpayers in states like California, New Jersey, and New York will be hit with higher tax bills when they file their 2018 returns and realize that they can now only deduct up to $10,000 in state and local taxes. There was a legitimate argument for reforming the tax code in a way that reduced the corporate tax rate, closed loopholes, and made the economy fairer and more productive, but Republicans chose a plan that rewards the rich at the expense of workers, and they had to lie to make this scheme seem legitimate. Now the true effects are coming to fruition. At least they said lie. That's worth something. I'll take that, and we'll move on from there to other important topics. I did, in fact, have that Texas shooting piece set aside, and once again, reminder, we didn't hear about it because it happened on February 14th, which was the date of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, and that took precedence, and rightly so. But as I mentioned to you when I was discussing the piece I wrote about, playing off of the Utah teacher, armed teacher that accidentally shot herself some years ago, we in this country tend to treat even shooting incidents like that one as local curiosities more than as national stories. To some extent, that has changed a little bit. To some extent, the Gunfail series has helped change some of that as well. But for the most part, we treat those stories as local or regional curiosities, and in particular, those which should be major national news stories to help us analyze the value of various proposals like, let's say, arming teachers. That should have been nationally reported after the fact. I mean, we quite correctly, I think, focused on Parkland, to be sure. But once the arm the teachers idea was resurrected and sold to us with all the benefits and none of the possible problems being brought up, we should have been able to say that very same day this thing happened in Texas. But because it didn't result in a mass shooting by a madman, but just rather a singular shooting by a police officer, whom we love or hate depending on how we feel that day. Anyway, we didn't find it in the national columns, so glad to bring it to your attention. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. And send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're into our final segment for the day. The last stretch here, we'll see what we can fit in. There's an awful lot we got to get to. And we will fail, I promise you, but we'll soldier on tomorrow, and we'll fail again, and we'll just keep trying because there's so much news to bring to your attention. Let's see. Next thing I guess we'll hit on is another quick mover. I guess we'll just do 2 or 3 states. Entire way. They spent the most of the morning on Utah in one way or another, and we brought up the state of Texas just because of the Amarillo would-be church shooting that was stopped. That turned into a church shooting, but a cop did the shooting, so it's okay or whatever. Or that all cops are cowards. I'm not sure where we stand this morning. That was really a rather amazing thing. Did we get a chance to talk about that on Friday? Had it happened on Friday that Trump, we by Friday we knew that the police officer didn't enter the building, but we suggested that there might be good reason for that. I think he had at that point called the cop a coward, which just seems, yes, that's right. We were worried about him, in fact, and worried that he might need to be put on suicide watch. What a horrible thing to have to deal with. But of course, the president can't hold his tongue about anything, and yada yada. Of course, lots of people hit him over the weekend for, remember his cadet bone spurs. I don't know if he should be calling anybody cowardly in particular. And by the way, I did see, we'll have to see if we can't scoop that up somewhere. Somebody put together side-by-side video of Trump and Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail dealing with potential shooter threats or some sort of threat from the audience, and the Secret Service alerting them that there was something going on about which they were concerned. And Hillary Clinton, who knows what they told her, who knows what the threat was, sort of standing there, I don't know, rather inquisitively, actually, and looking and saying, all right, what's the big deal here? And the Secret Service coming to her side and saying everything seems to be okay. Donald Trump, though, practically jumping out of his shorts and almost knocked his own podium over, trying to make it out of there, thinking, oh, my God, I'm going to be shot. People should be a little bit worried when they think they might be shot, but, it just put a fine point on the everybody else is a coward thing. All right, let's see. Moving on from that, we'll stick with some other gun issues, at least briefly. Maybe the rest of the show, but sticking to the topic in Texas, I just thought it would be a timely moment to remind you of the close cousin of arm the teachers. There's the old arm the students trick, but they can only get away with that one in colleges because, I don't know, for whatever reason, the NRA and their local affiliates only felt comfortable pushing for arming those over 21 to carry on campus, which is an interesting thing as the NRA now begins pushing back on the proposition that you ought to have to be 21 years old in order to buy, I guess, an assault rifle, although really it, maybe is arguable that they shouldn't own any guns of any kind until age of 21. But apparently that's too much for everybody. And they have new objections. No. You can't limit things like that. When the NRA and their affiliates were pushing to arm students on campus, they were successfully limited to, and just didn't push past the limitation of allowing only those with concealed carry permits or who were there had all sorts of different qualifications. Could be ex-military or ex-police or whatever. If you're over 21 and licensed, then in some of these states that will allow concealed carry on campus, you're A-OK for that, finally. I don't know why 21 didn't bother them then. But then again, it was probably always their plan, just like with armed teachers and everything else, to get in the door one way and then sue their way to allowing everybody else to be able to carry too. Anyway, so down there in Texas, where they began allowing campus carry this academic year, we've already seen, I believe, 1, maybe 2 accidental discharges on campus. And wouldn't you know it, at the worst possible moment for gun rights enthusiasts, 2 armed people, one a student, one a visiting student of some kind, either student or professor, I don't know, somebody visiting the campus, but left their guns, 2 people left their guns in the bathrooms. Again, bathrooms a huge problem at the University of Texas Austin campus. 2 people, same week. I think one day after the other. There's the news here reported by the Houston Chronicle. Students for concealed carry urged licensed to carry holders to be mindful, quote, be mindful of their firearms location. That is usually something you're supposed to do. And condition at all times after University of Texas at Austin police recovered 2 abandoned guns in 2 days this week from women's bathrooms. This would, of course, have been last week. This type of incident most commonly occurs when a license holder is new to concealed carry or frequently changes his or her manner of carry in order to accommodate different styles of clothing. Quinn Cox, Southwest Regional Director of the group, said in a statement early Thursday, "We at SCC, Students for Concealed Carry, recommend that all LTC holders adopt a consistent restroom routine that allows them to continuously maintain control of their firearms." Of course, strongly suggest is another way of backing off of, it's an absolute must. Remember, the guns are safe. Everything's going to be fine. Nobody's going to get hurt. There won't be any problems because we train people to always follow the rules. Always, always, always follow the rules, except when you don't. And if you don't, then it's okay, because really it's probably only because you're either new to it or maybe you put your gun in different places because of different kinds of clothing you wear. But anyway, the point is, it's all good. Just be mindful, everybody, of where your firearm is. Seems pretty basic, but it gets violated all the time. Bathrooms are a huge problem. And in case you were wondering or didn't remember or wanted me to say it again, yes, the Utah teacher who shot herself by accident on the campus of her elementary school did it in the bathroom. Bathrooms are huge problems for these people. On the other hand, I guess we can give credit where credit is due to the University of Texas. Again, the faculty, when debating how to implement campus carry, considered the possibility of requiring students to leave their guns out of the classrooms. You can carry on campus, fine. The law says we have to do that. Then let's install lockers outside of classrooms so that armed students can store their guns there without bringing them into the classroom. And there was, of course, pushback from those who said, well, the whole point is you never know when you're going to need your gun, and the shooter comes in. If he comes in after the bell rings, he knows all the shooters are going to be disarmed. But they also, the University of Texas faculty was, I think, probably ultimately correct in saying, yeah, you know where these accidents happen? Accidental discharge seem to happen in transitions. Like, well, they didn't say so, but like when people go to the bathroom and they got to figure out what to do with their gun. It's removing the gun from the holster, rendering it safe, putting it in the locker, later coming back, taking it from the locker, reloading it, putting it back in the holster. That creates, it puts people's hands on their guns. That's when the accidents tend to happen. So I guess, like I said, credit where credit is due for that one. UT Police Department spokeswoman Cindy Posey told the Dallas Morning News that this was the first time an unattended gun had been found on campus since August 2016. Don't know why that happened back then, but it did. I see. It didn't happen necessarily. It's the first one that's been found on campus since August of 2016 when Texas implemented a campus carry law that allows licensed to carry holders to bring concealed weapons on campus. Under the campus carry law, guns cannot be carried openly. Okay, so I guess it was August of 2016, which means that this would be the second academic year that it's been allowed. Not the first, but like I said, 2 accidental discharges that I'm aware of, and now the 2 abandoned guns. Both guns have been returned to their owners, UT Police said in a post to Twitter. One person was a student with a concealed carry license, and the second person was unaffiliated with UT Austin and was attending an on-campus conference. Cox, in his statement, called the events an anomaly. They aren't nationally, though they're an anomaly, I guess, for University of Texas at Austin's campus. But the problem is that forgetting guns in bathrooms nationally, not an anomaly. The fact that it had never happened on that campus before, given that guns have only been allowed on that campus for 2 years, doesn't really tell us a great deal. But if you limit it to the local issues, sure, we can pass it off as an anomaly. UT Austin students have loudly protested the campus carry law in the past few years. You may remember they organized the protest with sex toys on campus in August of 2016. Graduate students who cannot ban guns from their shared offices moved office hours to bars in Austin, where concealed carry is forbidden due to alcohol sales. But there were a few gun-related complaints in the law's first year of implementation. At least 20 Texas universities had no gun discharge incidents or reports of intimidation. How do you like that? You all report on the places where people accidentally fire their guns on campus. You didn't report on all the places that it didn't happen. They just did that. You believe that line? At least 20 Texas universities had no gun discharge incidents or reports of intimidation with a firearm in their first academic year under the law. Why did I just made the concession that it was the second? Is that wrong? Are they back in the first? Or the first is passed and they're now in the second? And in the first year, they had no gun discharges. Anyway, that, according to a Houston Chronicle review of university records, Lindsay Ellis, that's the author of it here, writes about higher education for the Chronicle. No note in here of the two campuses where they did have discharges. So, boy, did they bend over backwards for the gun crowd in that one. I don't know whether that was the intention or not, but it seems to have come out that way. Very weird. Or not weird at all, depending on how you look at it. Okay, I have another gun issue to touch on here. Paula Appany sent me a couple of comments, but also a link to a tweet storm on the subject of guns and what to do about them. Let me just see what we can do with the comments that she sent. Essentially, well, let's see. As she's saying here, to a large extent, I don't think we need buy-in from the gun nuts on all this. We have to steamroller them. We've spent the past years trying to reason with them to no avail. So meeting in the middle, perhaps not worth as much. One point she says to me, I've been making in exchanges about gun control post-Parkland, is that gun enthusiasts could have stepped in at any point and taken the lead on sane gun control. And had they been halfway reasonable in their offerings, most of us would have gone along with them. But they chose to adopt the most extreme positions possible and absolutely refused to acknowledge the concerns of the rest of us. They had their chance and they blew it, and now they need to get out of the way. I think I'm certainly in sympathy with that sentiment. Another point she says I've been making is that the goals need to be the elimination of mass shootings, which points to gun bans of various kinds, versus trying to reduce the carnage of mass shootings, which is where arming teachers and the rest comes from. So she then points me to this tweet storm, and I know I opened it up, and here it is. And we're neither of us sure how to pronounce the name along with this. And it looks like Alogo Agogo, which I don't know what to make of that. but you can find this person on Twitter, ALOGOAGOGO, Go, an Aussie and Army aviation vet, I guess be the Australian Army, and a part-time law student, discussing the often mentioned Australian reaction to their mass shooting in 1996, which would be banning a large swath of private gun ownership there. That gets pointed to a lot. Whether or not that's something that we could put into effect here in the United States or not, aside, it does get mentioned an awful lot. After every massacre, this person writes, there's inevitable talk about Australian gun laws post-1996 and how successful they've been at reducing gun violence, homicides, and suicides. Also, a lot of misinformation about bans and such. Here's what actually happened and what it means today. It's a good idea to turn to an Australian on this. Australia, like the U.S., has a long established history of gun ownership for farmers, sporting shooters, and hunters. The 1996 Port Arthur massacre was the catalyst to create uniform legislation across all Australian states and territories, summarized herein with this screen capture that we can read here. In broad terms, although it says in board terms, I think it means in broad terms, the legislation sought to prohibit automatic and military-style weapons, enact a national registration of all firearms, require a person to demonstrate a genuine reason to possess or use a firearm, make training a prerequisite for obtaining a firearms license, require a licensee to obtain a permit prior to acquiring a firearm, create uniform licensing requirements across all states and territories, create common grounds for refusing or revoking a license, introduce common grounds for the secure storage of firearms, and restrict mail-order purchases or firearms to licensed dealers. That was, I guess, what actually was implemented across Australia back post-96. So, to own a gun today, you first need a state-issued license. Who can get one down there in Australia? Basically, anyone who's a, quote, fit and proper person, completed basic training in safe handling, has a valid reason, like belonging to a shooting club, that's enough, or is a farmer, etc., and has access to safe storage. Details are also listed here. Any person over 18 may apply for a firearms license, provided they are a resident of the state of application, and we have a problem with that here in this country, are a fit and proper person, and who knows what that could mean, have not, within 5 years, been convicted of a disqualifying offense, including misuse of drugs, misuse of weapons, or the use or threatened use of violence, or been the subject of a domestic violence protection order. Have a genuine reason for a license, and that's the big difference, I think, with the United States, where we think of right, you can have one. Can demonstrate the appropriate training of the safe use of firearms and have access to secure storage. Persons 11 to 17 years may apply for a minor's license, which may be used for sports and target shooting or primary production on rural land. Okay, very interesting. That's, I guess, the details of the law. If you've beaten your spouse or kids, the tweet storm continues, or even threatened to, or been convicted of a drug or violent crime, you won't get a license in Australia. If the only reason you want a firearm is to pose with it on Instagram, bad luck. Once you've got your license, what firearms can you own? Well, pretty much any rimfire or center fire. That is to say that, he goes on to say here, 7.62 millimeter bolt action rifle or double barrel shotgun can be legally owned. Semi-automatics, yes, if you're a professional hunter, like with varmint and feral animals on your farmland, or under very specific conditions. What about handguns? Can you own a handgun in Australia? Yes, but only if you're a member of a sporting gun club, i.e. a skilled shot. Any rifle or handgun has to be stored at home with the bolt removed or action broken down in a locked steel cabinet. Well, okay, that raises the question for us here. What about home or personal defense? For all the reasons above, home invaders almost universally no longer have guns, of course, in Australia. You can legally deal with them with a cricket bat or something similar if you restrict the pasting you dish out to reasonable force. But criminals will get guns anyway, right? That often a big question here. Undoubtedly true. But an interesting thing has happened. The bad guys with guns for the last 20 years have been using them almost exclusively on one another. No one seriously worries about being shot in public anymore. There's no armed guards in schools. So a hunter who can hit their prey with a bolt-action rifle or double-barreled shotgun, you're good to go. If you can't with those firearms, frankly, you're crap at it and should find yourself a new pastime. And quite honestly, we should be thinking about that here. If, to the extent that you consider yourself a sportsman because you're hunting, bolt action is what you should be looking for. The idea of blowing the living crap out of your animals with semi-automatic weapons or semi-auto rifles with bump stocks or whatever seems like maybe the sport is missing. And I understand that there are some, feral hogs, I guess, can be quite ornery, and you're hunting them at night sometimes, or maybe all the time, and it's troublesome. But I mean, either you can kill them because you're skilled at what you're doing, or you can't. And I don't know if you should really necessarily be able to pump them full of lead like that. Anyway, prefer punching holes in paper? Have at it with almost anything but an AR or an AK. Blasting clay is more your thing. Give them both barrels. Aussies regularly win Olympic medals at trap and skeet. So in summary, if you're not a violent criminal, mentally unfit, or a reckless, unsafe, well, I don't know. What's the rule on saying the D-head word on the air? Well, we're not on anybody's air, but, this could be used as a rerun one day. Well, if you're none of those things, there's nothing stopping you from gun ownership and any professional, recreational, or competitive uses thereof. If you're just a poser with a gun fetish, you need not apply. Oh, almost forgot. Aussies still watch the exact same movies and play the same violent video games as the U.S., yet no more massacres. It was both the guns and the person holding it that was the cause, but no longer. And another thing, after the legislation was introduced, no one had their guns taken away. The choice was to comply with the new licensing and ownership obligations or sell your firearm back to the federal government at a reasonable value. Gun buyback. So responsible gun owners complied, registered their firearms, and made them safe. But a large number said, F it, do I really need this thing? No, may as well get back what I paid for it. One could argue they too were responsible gun owners. For the record, I'm not taking a position on what should or shouldn't happen in the U.S. This is merely a summary of what responsible gun ownership looks like elsewhere. That said, you can follow, he suggests, I am the Warax, W-A-R-A-X. For it was he who helped toss this pebble in the pond. Cheers. One final observation, if I may. Lots of veterans and healthcare professionals seem to have engaged with this, almost as if they know a bit more about the consequences. Probably wise to listen to them. Also, bravo for keeping things civil in the mentions. Well, you got lucky on that one there. Alogo agogo. Thanks for checking in and telling us what really went on there in Australia. All right, let's see. A couple of other things we might be able to fit in here and a couple comments to catch up on. Michael Musson commenting, Wikipedia lists 38 public colleges and universities in Texas. So I would like to revisit the comment about no gun incidents on 20 campuses. Yeah, I would too. That's a good point. I mean, I only knew of the two, and I was just sort of astonished that they didn't mention that there were the two. What a weird way of putting things. There's a link down here that says at least 20 Texas universities had no gun discharge incidents or reports of intimidation. If there are 38, is that right? Is that what you said to me? 38 that are public, then 18 had gun discharges or incidents and 20 didn't. That's a pretty close call. Now, there's a link here, and it's to the Houston Chronicle's own piece. I guess we'll spend the balance of our day on that. Since we might as well, since we laid the groundwork for it and there's only a couple minutes left, and switching gears would be very costly time-wise. Campus carry law poses concern for colleges with high school students. Yes, there are some dual enrollment situations probably down there, as we have here in Virginia. Lindsay Ellis covered that one back in July 31st of 2017 with this piece. Let's see. Each time a security alert from Lone Star College lit up Cheryl Longa's cell phone last spring, she felt a wave of anxiety even though her daughter's dual credit classes are online only. So that's a concerned parent there. We're trying to avoid going on campus. Oh, that's interesting. Longa said she's only 16. That's just another world. Probably a good idea for a number of reasons. But, on the other hand, if you felt better about the campus, I would say maybe you want to get your kid used to the college campus feel. But okay, plus guns, I don't know. Longa's daughter is among tens of thousands of dual credit high school students who enroll in Texas community college classes each year to earn cheap credits and acclimate to campus life. Although if you're doing it online only, I don't know. But the state's campus carry law, which Texas community colleges must enact on Tuesday, remember when this is written, back at the end of July of 2017, reveals complications that emerge when the line between high school and college blurs. This fall, kids may sit in classes next to an adult student who's legally carrying a concealed handgun, even as it is illegal in Texas to carry on grade school property. Interesting twist. The law, Longa said, is just another good reason why she enrolled her homeschooled daughter online only for dual credit courses. Universities last August began abiding by Senate Bill 11, the law that allows licensed holders to carry concealed handguns on college campuses, while two-year schools had until this year to determine how they would meet the state mandate. Could faculty make private offices gun-free? What about labs? Community colleges also had to determine what to do in classrooms that primarily or exclusively serve minors, a growing demographic on these campuses, as older adults can more easily find work in recovering economies without an associate's or certificate. Lone Star College, whose campuses are largely north and west of Beltway 8, is a telling example of this demographic shift. In the fall of 2012, less than 10% of Lone Star's student body was dual credit students. By last fall, the number of dual credit students had more than doubled to 13,089. Well, this is all very interesting, and I guess that part of the article makes the point that, even if you're trying to restrict it to those over 21, you're still dealing with carrying among students of the same age, at least some of them, among whom you otherwise prohibit weapons still in Texas, although Texas now moving to implement armed teacher laws, so that is likely to change as well. But let's see, what about incidents are rare? At least 20 Texas universities had no gun discharge incidents or reports of intimidation with firearm in their first academic year under the law, according to a Houston Chronicle review of university records. More than a dozen, though, I guess, had at least one report, including aggravated robbery, an accidental discharge in a residence hall, that's the one I remember, and disorderly conduct. Willingham, who's Willingham? Paul Willingham, police chief Paul Willingham. Where is he the police chief? Is he the Aldine ISD? I guess we gotta kind of go back here. Lone Star, biggest community college systems in the state by enrollment, has interpreted that to block concealed handguns from areas of campus exclusively used by high school students. Okay, they are doing that. Aldine ISD, for example, has a campus on Lone Star's Victory Center in Greater Inwood. Okay, so the police chief in the area says, well, the incidents are rare, and I guess that's a good thing. It hasn't really affected the general safety of the campuses. Still, some faculty continued to protest. 3 University of Texas at Austin professors who argued the law had a chilling effect on their ability to speak freely last week appealed a federal judge's dismissal of their campus carry lawsuit to the Fifth Circuit. And I don't know if I know offhand how that one came out. But really, talk about glossing over the issues that they didn't even mention that it could have done it in one sentence in the prior piece, or they could have pointed out that there are 38 colleges, public universities and colleges in the system, and if only 20 of them didn't have a problem, that means nearly the other half did, although I guess it's only listed as, it says more than a dozen had at least one report. That's pretty, I gotta be honest, that's pretty weak reporting. That seems like going out of your way to pretend that there's not much happening. And I understand accepting the conclusion that they're relatively rare, that is fine, but really not even a nod of one sentence to this is exactly how many there were. Maybe it was difficult to determine in some cases whether it was one that you would count one way or another, but honestly, a sidebar listing them, nothing, not even a link. I find that pretty difficult to justify. And I guess you did too. Thanks for your participation, Michael, and all the rest of you who sent your comments along. There's much, much more to discuss on guns and the topic of the NRA. I didn't even get to one of the things I spent my weekend on, which was ferreting out all those examples of codified relationships in the several states between the state government and the NRA. Since this corporate campaign is going on, that Greg mentioned, it's also time to pay attention to the relationship between the states and the NRA. More of an explanation of that, hopefully, tomorrow. And now, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam. Next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's try and cram a couple of things in here. Coming up next, Trump is living in a fantasy land, right-wing bubble where all the news for him is wonderful. Texas Republican Mike Conaway, currently leading the House Intelligence Committee's investigation. We told you about that. He couldn't see the connection with Deutsche Bank. Paul Manafort's Los Angeles bankruptcy fight may now open new avenues for Mueller, too. Stay tuned.